Our next speaker is Mr. Gary Banks, and Gary is chair of the Productivity Commission. He's been the chair since the Productivity Commission's inception and was reappointed most recently in April last year. In addition to overseeing the Commission's activities, he's personally headed national inquiries on such topics as national competition policy, the national reform agenda, the economic implications of an ageing Australia. I must say that I'm getting a bit tired of this term ageing. I prefer experienced. Gary's also chaired the Australian Government's Regulation Task Force in 2006, and he's currently presiding over the Productivity Commission's inquiry into the gambling industry and executive remuneration. He chairs the Intergovernmental Steering Committee for the Review of Government Services and was the initial convener for its report on Indigenous disadvantage. In 1998, he was a member of the West Review of Higher Education. In 2007, he was made an Officer of the Order of Australia for services to the development of public policy in microeconomic reform and regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gary Banks.
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you to Eric Sidoti and the Whitlam Institute for inviting me here. I feel that I've had a succession of hard acts to follow. Well, when Eric first invited me, he must have known that he was making me an offer that I couldn't refuse. First of all, the topic, markets free but not beyond government intervention, is an important one. I mean, it involves a recognition that markets have obviously a very important role to play, but also, as other speakers have indicated, that governments too have an important role to play, and it's particularly important to get the mix right for the sake of the community benefit in the longer term. I've spent much of my career puzzling in that territory, and indeed that is the credo of the Productivity Commission itself. I guess the second reason why this was an offer I couldn't refuse was that it is an event hosted by an institution named after Gough Whitlam. And after all, it was Gough Whitlam who really began the process of opening up Australia's economy to the global market. He was the first Australian leader, I think, to act on the understanding that a freer, more competitive market would facilitate greater economic efficiency and productivity, which would in turn underpin income growth and pay for the social programs that can address inequality and disadvantage. In a cat's cry of the time, I remember the phrase that government cannot redistribute what its economy does not produce. Whitlam saw clearly that the pursuit of economic efficiency and social progress were complementary. And it was Whitlam who dealt the first blow against Fortress Australia with the 25% tariff cut, 1973. And while it had multiple rationales and it was partially reversed in following years, it was a politically brave, indeed unprecedented gesture that demonstrated what was possible and contributed greatly to the developments in policy thinking that saw the next Labor government a decade later pick up where Whitlam had left off and succeed in opening up the Australian economy on a more sustained basis. Now, these further reforms and the reforms that have occurred since then were Whitlam's legacy in another way. Whitlam understood and acted on the knowledge that policy reforms to promote efficiency and community well-being are often stymied by vocal minorities who stand to lose, while not being adequately appreciated by the much larger section of the community who are the ultimate beneficiaries. He created the Industries Assistance Commission out of the old Tariff Board to expose such claims to careful analysis and public scrutiny and thereby promote a more informed political decision-making in a more neutralised political environment where the trade-offs in reform could be better appreciated by the community. Now, at this point I must declare my own interest, because my first job was with Whitlam's Industries Assistance Commission, and after doing various other things, my current job is with its descendant, the Productivity Commission? Well, the basis for my affinity, I think, is clear. Well, as mentioned, the assigned title of my talk, Markets Free but Not Beyond Intervention, can be interpreted as a simple recognition of reality, a statement of fact. I can't think of any market in Australia which is not subject to intervention of some kind. Indeed, some markets could be said to be creatures of regulation, depending on it for their very existence. And the carbon pollution reduction scheme being the most important and, I guess, contentious current example of that. While some markets have only emerged through the loosening of tight regulatory constraints, and the gambling industries, about which I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment, are a good example of that. But in the shadow of the global financial crisis, you can also read into the title the implication that markets can be too free and not regulated enough. That's, I think, a reasonable position in the light of recent experience in financial markets in particular, and it leads to the big questions for public policy. How free and how much intervention, and very importantly, how should governments go about making those decisions in the best interests of the community? Well, in seeking to address, if not completely answer those questions, I'll talk about, firstly, what purpose markets serve and their contribution to economic progress, and Australia's in particular. Secondly, the limits of markets, what they can't do, and related to that, why they retain an image problem in the midst of the prosperity that they've created or engendered. And thirdly, I'll use a couple of case studies from the current work of the Productivity Commission, to which John's just referred, executive remuneration and gambling, to illustrate some principles that should have wider application. Well, the stories that have emerged from the global financial crisis about complex financial derivative markets, as has been said, transferring risk from those who didn't care about it to those who don't understand it, together with revelations about numbers of people losing their savings in shonky investment vehicles, the failure of high-profile financial intermediaries, and indeed the erratic swings in stock markets and currency markets, are all seen by many people as markets having a fundamental problem, and that's understandable. But in reality, markets are the solution to a much bigger problem. They yield benefits that have greatly outweighed their costs, including those just experienced. Problems in markets should not be conflated or mixed up with the notion of problems of markets. It's easy to forget or lose sight of the simple function and logic of markets, a means of connecting willing buyers and sellers to their mutual benefit. That's all they do. And of course, if they do it well, they achieve a lot. But like the old saying about oils, markets ain't markets. Some operate a lot better than others. Those societies with better functioning markets have also been the most successful economically, and indeed often socially the most successful as well. Indeed, the economic progress of mankind is broadly coextensive with the evolution of markets, from localised barter to monetised transactions encompassing many people over very large distances. Now, how rapidly and effectively those markets have developed has depended in turn on the development of rules that have facilitated them and reduced the costs of transactions. The key ones being how well property rights are defined, how effectively suppliers compete, how well informed are buyers, and the nature and reach of mechanisms for legal redress when things go wrong. Through the medium of prices, competitive markets ensure that a country's resources get put to use where they can do the most good, taking account of how much people value different goods and services and how much those goods and services cost to produce.